Before the first ship ever touched the shores of Troy, before the first drop of blood stained the plains that would drink the lives of thousands, there was a prophecy. It was spoken in the halls of Olympus, whispered among the immortals like a secret too dangerous to be forgotten. The son of Thetis would surpass his father. He would become greater than any god who dared to claim him. Zeus heard it, Poseidon heard it, and both turned away from the most beautiful of the Nereids, the silver-footed goddess of the sea, for neither wished to sire a son who might one day cast him down from his throne. The king of the gods remembered what he had done to his own father. He remembered the war that had shaken the foundations of existence. And so Thetis, immortal and radiant, was given to a mortal man. Her fate was sealed not by love, but by fear. The gods had decided. She would bear a son who could threaten no throne in heaven. She would bear a son who would die. Peleus was king of Phthia, ruler of the Myrmidons, a warrior whose name was already carved into legend. He had sailed with the Argonauts. He had faced monsters and emerged unbroken. But nothing in his life had prepared him for the task of winning a goddess. Chiron, the wise one who dwelt in the caves of Mount Pelion, told him what he must do. Thetis would resist. She would change her form. She would become fire and water, beast and shadow. But if Peleus held fast, if he refused to release her no matter what shape she took, she would yield. And so it happened. On the shores of Thessaly, Peleus seized the goddess as she emerged from the waves. She twisted in his arms, becoming flame that scorched his skin, becoming a creature with fangs that tore at his flesh, becoming water that slipped through his fingers. But he did not let go. His hands bled, his body burned, and still he held. When at last she returned to her true form, exhausted and defeated, she looked into his eyes and saw something she had never expected to find in a mortal. She saw a will that would not break. The wedding of Peleus and Thetis became the last great gathering of gods and mortals in a single place. They came from every corner of the world and every realm of Olympus. Zeus descended from his throne. Hera walked among the guests with her peacock gaze. Apollo brought his lyre. The muses sang. Chiron opened his cave to receive them, and the slopes of Mount Pelion blazed with divine light. Gifts were given that night, which would echo through history. Poseidon presented a pair of immortal beings to pull the wedding chariot. Chiron himself gave Peleus a spear of ashwood, its shaft polished by Athena, its blade forged by Hephaestus in the fires beneath the earth. This spear would one day drink the blood of Hector. But the guests did not know that yet. They did not know what darkness had also been invited to the feast. Eris came uninvited. The goddess of strife had been deliberately excluded from the celebration. Her presence brought only chaos, only ruin. But she came anyway, slipping through the revelers like a shadow, and in her hand she carried a single golden apple. She cast it among the goddesses with 3 words inscribed upon its gleaming surface: "For the fairest." Hera reached for it. Athena reached for it. Aphrodite reached for it. And in that moment, the seeds of the greatest war the world would ever know were planted in the soil of vanity. The judgment would fall to Paris, a prince of Troy, who did not yet know what his choice would cost. But that reckoning lay years in the future. On this night, under the stars of Thessaly, Peleus and Thetis were wed, and the promise of their union was a child who would change everything. Achilles was born in the palace of Phthia, and from his first breath, his mother knew what awaited him. The prophecy had not been forgotten. Her son would be great, her son would be glorious, her son would die young on the fields of a distant war. Thetis could not accept this. She was immortal. She would watch mountains crumble and seas dry to dust, and still she would exist. But her child, this perfect being born of her own body, would be taken from her before he had truly lived. She had to find a way to change his fate, The stories of what she did vary among those who recorded them. Some say she anointed the infant with ambrosia each night and held him over sacred flames, burning away his mortality piece by piece. Some say Peleus discovered her one night, the baby suspended over the fire, and his cry of horror broke the ritual before it could be completed. But the tale that endured longest spoke of a river that flowed through the realm of the dead, the Styx. Its waters were poison to mortals and gods alike, but they held a power that nothing else possessed. Whatever they touched became invulnerable. Thetis carried her son down into the darkness. She descended past the wailing shades, past the ferryman who asked no questions of a goddess, past the black shores where the dead wandered without memory, and there, where the river churned with the essence of death itself, she dipped her child into the waters. She held him by the ankle, gripping him so tightly that her fingers left marks on his flesh. The current pulled at him, the cold seeped into his skin, and when she lifted him out, he was transformed. His body had become something more than mortal. No blade would pierce him, no arrow would find his heart. He was invincible, except where her hand had held him, except for one small place on his heel where the waters had never touched. Thetis looked at her son and felt both triumph and terror. She had given him the greatest gift any mother could give, and she had also sealed his doom. For the fates do not forget, and every gift comes with a price. The boy grew quickly, as if time itself knew he had little of it to spare. Peleus watched his son with the pride of a king and the sorrow of a father who understood prophecy. When Achilles was old enough, Peleus carried him up the slopes of Mount Pelion to the cave where Chiron dwelt. The Ancient One had taught Jason. He had taught Asclepius. He had taught Heracles himself. Now he would shape the child who was destined to surpass them all. Chiron's cave was unlike any dwelling in the mortal world. Its walls were carved with the images of heroes who had come before. Its shelves held herbs that could heal any wound and poisons that could kill any enemy. The scent of wood smoke and wild honey filled the air. And it was here, in this place between the human world and something older, that Achilles spent his earliest years. Chiron fed him on the marrow of great beasts to give him strength. He taught him to track prey through the densest forests. He taught him to read the stars and to understand the language of wind and water. He taught him the art of the lyre so that his fingers could create beauty as well as destruction. And he taught him medicine, the knowledge of how to mend what war would tear apart. Achilles learned everything with a speed that astonished even his ancient teacher. By the time he was 6 years old, he was hunting creatures that grown men feared. By the time he was 10, there was no weapon he could not master. But he was not alone. Patroclus came to Mount Pelion as a boy, marked by tragedy. His father, Menoetius, had sent him away after a terrible accident. In a moment of anger during a game, Patroclus had struck another child and killed him. The death had been unintentional, but it could not be undone. Exile was the only way to cleanse the blood guilt, and so Patroclus arrived at the court of Peleus, a boy carrying shame like a stone in his chest. Peleus saw something in him. Perhaps he recognized the weight of a life that had been altered by a single moment. He took Patroclus in and sent him to Chiron alongside his own son. The two boys became inseparable. They trained together in the morning mists. They hunted together through the long afternoons. They slept side by side in the cave while the fire burned low. What grew between them was something the ancient poets would struggle to name. It was deeper than friendship. It was fiercer than brotherhood. Patroclus became the one person in the world who saw Achilles not as a legend in the making, but as a boy who laughed and bled and feared the dark like any other. And Achilles, who had been set apart from birth by prophecy and power, found in Patroclus the only home that truly mattered. The years on Mount Pelion could not last forever. The world was changing. Far to the east, in the citadel of Troy, Paris had made his choice. He had awarded the golden apple to Aphrodite, and in return, she had promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen was her name. She was queen of Sparta, wife of Menelaus, and when Paris came to claim his prize, he set in motion a war that would consume a generation. Menelaus called upon every king who had once sworn an oath to protect Helen's marriage. The ships began to gather at ACHILLES. The greatest warriors of Greece prepared to sail, and the name Achilles was on every tongue. But Thetis was not ready to let him go. She had heard the prophecies that followed her son like shadows. If Achilles went to Troy, he would win eternal glory. If Achilles went to Troy, he would never return. She could not bear it. She had already lost so much in becoming a mortal's wife. She would not lose her child to a war fought over another man's stolen bride, and so she devised a plan. She took Achilles from Phthia in the dead of night and carried him across the sea to the island of Scyros. There, in the court of King Lycomedes, she hid him among the king's daughters, dressed in women's clothing, disguised as a girl named Pyrrha. The deception was complete. No one would think to look for the greatest warrior of his age among weaving maidens. Achilles would be safe. But Achilles was not made for safety. He chafed against the disguise. He hated the soft fabrics and the endless hours of sitting still. Yet even in hiding, he could not entirely suppress his nature. Deidamia, one of Lycomedes' daughters, saw through the pretense. She recognized the way he moved, the coiled power in his limbs, the fire in his eyes that no dress could conceal. What passed between them was hidden from the histories, but its result was not. When Achilles finally left Scyros, he left behind a son. Neoptolemus, they would call him, Pyrrhus in some tellings. He would grow to be a warrior as savage as his father, and he would stand in the ruins of Troy when the war was finally done. The Greeks knew they could not win without Achilles. The seer Calchas had declared it. Troy would not fall unless the son of Peleus fought beside them. Odysseus was sent to find him. The king of Ithaca was known for his cunning, and he suspected where Thetis might have hidden her son. He arrived at Scyros with gifts for the daughters of Lycomedes. Fabrics and jewelry and perfumes were spread before the maidens. But among the treasures, Odysseus had placed a shield and a spear. The girls reached for the beautiful things. One of them reached for the weapons. And when Odysseus sounded a war trumpet, that same maiden dropped all pretense and stood ready to fight. Achilles had been found. Thetis wept when she learned what had happened. She came to her son one final time, appearing on the shore as the ships prepared to sail. The sea wind carried her voice to him, heavy with grief and something that might have been anger. She told him the truth that he already knew. Two fates lay before him. He could stay home, live a long life, father children, grow old in peace, and be forgotten within a generation. Or he could sail to Troy, win glory that would echo until the end of time, and die before his hair turned gray. There was no third path. There was no escape from the choice. Achilles looked at his mother, this goddess who had done everything in her power to save him, and he made his decision. He chose glory. He chose the war. He chose to burn so brightly that the darkness would never forget he had existed. Thetis watched him board the ship. She watched the sails catch the wind. She watched until the fleet became a line on the horizon, and then she sank beneath the waves to mourn in the depths where no one could hear her. The journey to Troy was not a straight path. The Greeks landed first in Mysia, believing they had reached their destination, and fought a bloody battle against King Telephus before realizing their mistake. Achilles wounded Telephus with the spear Chiron had given him, and later, following a prophecy, he healed the wound so that Telephus would guide them to Troy. Years of preparation and delay followed. The fleet gathered and scattered and gathered again. Achilles grew restless. He had chosen war, and war was making him wait. When they finally reached the shores of Troy, another prophecy hung over the landing. The first Greek to touch Trojan soil would be the first to die. The ships hung back from the beach, each captain unwilling to lead his men into that curse. Achilles watched from the prow of his vessel. The Myrmidons ranked behind him, and he saw a man leap from another ship. Protesilaus. He was dead before his feet had stopped moving. Cut down by Hector himself, the war had begun with blood. It would end with blood, and in between there would be nothing but blood. The siege of Troy lasted 10 years, 10 years of grinding warfare, of raids and skirmishes, of heroes falling on both sides. Achilles was everywhere. He was the spear point of every assault. He was the terror that made Trojan mothers wake screaming in the night. He ravaged the countryside around the city, sacking 12 towns by sea and 11 by land. He captured cattle and treasure and slaves. He killed princes and warriors whose names had once been spoken with reverence, and with each victory, his legend grew. The Trojans began to believe that he was not mortal at all. They whispered that no weapon could harm him. They whispered that death itself was afraid to touch him. But the war could not be won. Troy's walls still stood. Hector still defended them. And the Greeks grew tired. It was in the 10th year that everything changed. If this story is capturing you, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Here, each narrative is a journey through the myths that shaped civilizations. And what comes next in the story of Achilles will reveal the price of pride and the fury that shook the heavens themselves. Agamemnon was commander of the Greek forces, king of Mycenae, the most powerful man in the alliance. He was also proud beyond measure and blind to the destruction that pride would bring. When Apollo sent a plague upon the Greek camp, the seer Calchas revealed its cause. Agamemnon had taken as his prize a woman named Chryseis, daughter of a priest of Apollo. The god demanded her return. Agamemnon refused at first, but as the plague continued to kill his soldiers, he was forced to yield. Chryseis would go back to her father, but Agamemnon would not accept the loss without compensation. He looked across the assembled kings and fixed his gaze on Achilles. He would take Briseis. He would take the woman who had been awarded to the son of Peleus. He would remind everyone who held the power here. Achilles rose to his feet with murder in his eyes. The tent fell silent. Every man present understood what was about to happen. Achilles' hand moved to his sword, one step forward, and the war would end right here in the blood of the Greek commander. But something stayed his hand. Some say it was Athena herself, visible only to him, whispering that vengeance would come in a better form. Some say it was the weight of the oath he had sworn, the alliance that bound him to this army. Whatever the reason, Achilles did not draw his blade. Instead, he spoke words that cut deeper than any sword. He called Agamemnon a drunkard. He called him a coward who took the prizes of better men. He swore that the Greeks would come crawling to him, begging for his return, and that he would not lift a finger until they understood what they had lost. Then he withdrew. He took his Myrmidons back to their encampment by the ships. He laid down his spear. He refused to fight. And for the first time since the war began, the Trojans tasted hope. The days that followed were a slow catastrophe for the Greeks. Without Achilles, their attacks faltered. Hector led the Trojans in counter-assaults that pushed the invaders back toward the sea. Men died who would have lived if the son of Peleus had been fighting beside them. Agamemnon watched his army bleed and knew that he had made a terrible mistake. He sent an embassy to Achilles. Odysseus went, and old Phoenix, who had helped raise the boy, and Ajax, whose courage was second only to Achilles' own. They brought gifts beyond counting, gold and tripods and women, and the promise that Briseis would be returned untouched. They brought Agamemnon's apology, though the king himself was too proud to deliver it in person. Achilles listened, and Achilles refused. His rage had become something more than anger over a stolen prize. It had become a principle. He spoke to his visitors of the futility of war, of how the brave and the cowardly receive the same portion of honor from ungrateful kings. He spoke of going home, of living the long, quiet life his mother had once offered him. The embassy returned with nothing. The Greeks prepared for the worst. Patroclus watched his friend and saw something he had never seen before. He saw a man losing himself. The Achilles who had laughed beside him on Mount Pelion was disappearing into a bitterness that consumed everything it touched. And outside the tent, the Greeks were dying. Patroclus could hear the clash of bronze. He could smell the smoke where the Trojans had begun to burn the ships. He went to Achilles with tears streaming down his face and begged him to reconsider. Achilles looked at his oldest friend and saw the grief there. It moved something in him that nothing else had reached. He still could not fight. His honor would not permit it, but perhaps there was another way. He offered Patroclus his armor. He offered him command of the Myrmidons. Let the Trojans see that gleaming bronze and believe that Achilles had returned. Let them flee in terror. But Patroclus must not pursue them too far. He must drive them from the ships and no further. He must not try to take Troy itself. Patroclus agreed. The transformation was immediate. When Patroclus emerged in Achilles' armor, the Myrmidons roared. They had been idle too long. Their blood burned for battle. They swept down on the Trojans like a storm breaking over the plain. The enemy saw the familiar gleam of that terrible armor and believed that death itself had returned to the field. They ran. Patroclus pursued them. He killed and killed again, his spear drinking the blood of every man who stood before him. He killed Sarpedon, son of Zeus himself, and the king of the gods wept as his child fell. The Trojans scattered toward their walls, and Patroclus forgot his promise. The glory of battle had entered his veins. He was no longer himself. He was something greater, something that could not be stopped. He drove toward the gates of Troy, and for a moment it seemed that the city would fall to him alone. But the gods were watching. Apollo had sworn to protect Troy until its appointed hour, and the hour had not yet come. Apollo descended from Olympus and struck Patroclus from behind. The blow was invisible to mortal eyes, but its effect was devastating. Patroclus staggered. His helmet flew from his head. His spear fell from his numb fingers. Euphorbos, a Trojan warrior, saw his chance and drove a spear into Patroclus's back. It was not a mortal wound, but it slowed him. And then Hector came. Hector, Prince of Troy, defender of his people, the greatest warrior on the Trojan side. He faced the wounded man and saw that this was not Achilles at all. But it did not matter. This was the one wearing Achilles' armor. This was the one who had slaughtered so many of his countrymen. Hector drove his spear into Patroclus's belly and watched him fall. As he died, Patroclus looked up at his killer and spoke his last words. He told Hector that it was not a man who had defeated him, but a god. He told him that death was coming. He told him that Achilles would cut him down before the sun had set many more times on Troy. Hector stripped the armor from the body. He put on the bronze that had been made for a son of a goddess, and he did not understand that he had just put on his own death. The news reached Achilles like a knife in the heart. He was sitting in his tent when Antilochus came running, and he knew from the way the man moved that something had shattered. The words fell from Antilochus's lips. Patroclus was dead. Hector had killed him. The armor was lost. Achilles collapsed. He fell to the earth and grabbed fistfuls of ash and poured them over his head. He tore at his hair. He screamed so loudly that his mother heard him in the depths of the sea. The Myrmidons gathered around him, weeping themselves, but they could not reach him. He was alone in his grief, alone in a darkness that no light could penetrate. Everything he had refused to fight for now meant nothing. The honor he had guarded so jealously had cost him the one person who mattered more than glory. Thetis came to him from the waves. She found him lying in the dust, covered in ashes, his face twisted with agony. She held him as she had held him when he was a child, and she wept with him. She knew what this meant. She knew that vengeance would demand its price. When Achilles swore that he would kill Hector or die trying, she did not attempt to dissuade him. She only asked him to wait one more day. His armor was gone. Hector wore it now, but she would bring him new armor. She would go to Hephaestus himself and beg the god of the forge to create something worthy of her son's final battles. Achilles agreed to wait, but he could not remain idle while Patroclus's body lay on the battlefield, fought over by Greeks and Trojans alike. He went to the edge of the trench that protected the ships, and he stood there, unarmed, unarmored, and he screamed. The sound was not human. It was the cry of grief and rage given voice, amplified by Athena until it echoed off the walls of Troy. 3 times he screamed, and 3 times the Trojans fell back in terror, abandoning their assault, fleeing from a single man's voice. 12 of their number died in the rout, trampled by their own comrades. The Greeks recovered Patroclus's body as darkness fell. That night, Thetis climbed to Olympus. She found Hephaestus in his forge, the fire roaring, his hammer ringing against divine metal. He owed her a debt from ages past, and he was glad to repay it. Through the night he worked. He created a breastplate that shone like fire. He created greaves that fit as though they had been grown rather than made. He created a helmet with a golden crest that would make Achilles visible across any battlefield. And he created a shield. The shield was his masterpiece. Upon its surface, Hephaestus carved the world itself. He carved the earth and the sea and the sky. He carved 2 cities, one at peace and one at war. He carved farmers plowing and dancers whirling, and a boy playing the lyre while cattle grazed in meadows of gold. He carved the ocean that encircled everything, binding creation together. When Thetis brought the shield to her son, it blazed so brightly that the Myrmidons turned away in fear. Only Achilles could look upon it without flinching. Only Achilles could lift it and feel that it had been made for him and no other. Dawn came. Achilles armed himself. The Greeks saw him emerge, and the weariness fell from their faces. He was taller than they remembered. He was more terrible. The new armor seemed to burn with its own light, and his eyes held nothing but the promise of death. He called for reconciliation with Agamemnon, not because he had forgiven the king, but because personal disputes meant nothing now. There was only Hector, there was only vengeance. The army assembled. Agamemnon swore that he had never touched Briseis and offered all the gifts that had been promised before. Achilles barely heard him. He was already moving toward the gates. What followed was not a battle. It was a slaughter. Achilles waded into the Trojan ranks and killed every man who came within reach of his spear. He killed so many that the bodies clogged the river Scamander. The river god himself rose from the waters and attacked him, sending waves crashing against the hero, trying to drown him in the blood of his own victims. Achilles fought the river. He fought with water pouring into his lungs and corpses battering against him and divine fury pressing him down. And he would not die. Hephaestus sent fire to drive back the waters. The river retreated. Achilles climbed from the carnage and continued killing. The Trojans fled to their walls, all except one. Hector stood before the Scaean gates and watched Achilles approach. His parents begged him to come inside. His father Priam wept and tore at his white hair. His mother Hecuba bared the breast that had nursed him and pleaded for him to save himself. But Hector could not run. He was Prince of Troy. He had killed Patroclus. He had known this moment would come, and yet when Achilles drew near, something broke inside him. Fear. For the first time in his life, Hector felt genuine terror. He saw death walking toward him in gleaming bronze, and his courage failed. He ran, he fled around the walls of his own city, and Achilles pursued him. 3 times they circled Troy. The gods watched from Olympus, their hearts divided. Athena wanted Hector dead. Apollo wanted him saved. In the end, Athena descended. She took the form of Hector's brother Deiphobus and convinced him to stand and fight. Hector stopped running. He turned to face his enemy, and when he reached for his brother's spare spear, there was no one there. He was alone. Achilles and Hector faced each other for the last time. Hector attempted to bargain. He proposed that whichever of them fell, the other would return the body to his family for proper burial. Achilles refused. There would be no terms. There would be no mercy. He called Hector a dog. He swore that the Trojans would never recover his corpse. And then he attacked. Hector threw his spear. It struck Achilles' shield and bounced away. Achilles threw his own spear and missed, but Athena returned it to his hand unseen. Hector drew his sword and charged. Achilles waited. He knew the armor Hector wore because he had worn it himself for years. He knew where the gaps were. And when Hector came within reach, Achilles drove his spear through the opening at the throat, the only place the bronze did not protect. Hector fell, but he did not die immediately. He lay in the dust before the walls of his city, his blood pooling beneath him, and he looked up at his killer. With his final breath, he begged Achilles to return his body. He invoked the memory of Peleus, of what it meant for a father to lose a son. Achilles looked down at him with nothing but hatred. He told Hector that if he could, he would butcher his corpse and eat it raw. Then he watched him die. The Greeks swarmed around the body. They stabbed it and mocked it, and stripped away the armor that had once belonged to their own champion. Achilles ordered his men to cut holes in Hector's ankles. He threaded leather thongs through the wounds and tied the body to his chariot. And then he drove. He dragged Hector's corpse in circles around the walls of Troy, while Priam watched from the ramparts, and Hecuba screamed, and Andromache, Hector's wife, fainted at the sight. This was not enough. For 12 days, Achilles continued his desecration. Each morning he dragged the body around the tomb of Patroclus. Each evening he left it lying in the dust outside his tent. The Greeks burned Patroclus with full honors, holding funeral games and sacrifices, but Achilles could not stop. His grief had become rage, and his rage had become madness. Even the gods grew troubled. Apollo preserved Hector's corpse from decay, protecting it with divine ichor, but he could not protect it from the indignity of Achilles' hatred. Finally, Zeus intervened. He sent Thetis to tell her son that he must release the body. He sent Iris to tell Priam to go to the Greek camp and ransom his child. The old king gathered treasures beyond counting. He loaded a wagon with gold and robes and tripods, and in the darkness of night, guided by Hermes, he crossed the lines that no Trojan had ever crossed alive. Priam found Achilles in his tent, still sitting beside the body of Patroclus. The king of Troy knelt before the man who had killed his son. He took Achilles' hands, those same hands that had slain Hector. He brought them to his lips, and he said something that no one expected. He asked Achilles to think of his own father. He asked him to imagine Peleus growing old in Phthia, waiting for a son who would never return. He told Achilles that he had endured what no man should endure. He had kissed the hands of the one who killed his children, and now he begged for the only thing he had left, his son's body, a chance to bury him with honor. Achilles looked at this broken old man and saw something he recognized. Grief. The same grief that had driven him to madness was reflected back at him in Priam's eyes, and in that moment, something shifted. The rage did not disappear. The hatred did not vanish. But something human rose up through the darkness, and Achilles wept. He wept for Patroclus. He wept for his father, whom he would never see again. He wept for himself, for the choice he had made so long ago, for the short, bright life that was now rushing toward its end. He lifted Priam to his feet. He ordered his men to prepare Hector's body with honor. He offered the king food and rest. And when Priam asked how many days he would need to properly mourn and bury his son, Achilles promised to hold back the Greek army for that time. 11 days for lamentation and preparation. On the 12th day, the war would resume. Priam took his son home. The days after Hector's funeral were filled with strange portents. New allies came to Troy. Penthesilea arrived with her warriors, and Achilles slew her in battle. As she died, their eyes met, and some say he fell in love with her in that final moment. Memnon came with his forces from distant lands, and Achilles slew him too, but the death weighed on him in ways the others had not. He knew the end was near. The prophecy had always been clear. He would not outlive Hector by long. His mother had told him this since childhood. The fates had woven it into the fabric of existence. And still, when he saw the walls of Troy gleaming in the morning light, he did not hesitate. He charged toward the Scaean gates alone, driving the Trojans before him, determined to breach the city at last. That was when Paris struck. Paris, the prince who had started the war. Paris, who had hidden from battle while better men died. Paris, who had never defeated anyone of importance in single combat. He stood in the shadows of the temple of Apollo, and the god guided his hand. The arrow flew true. It found the one place where Achilles was not protected. It struck his heel. Achilles fell. Even then, he did not die immediately. He fought on, dragging himself toward the gates, on killing Trojans with his bare hands until his strength finally failed. The Greeks swarmed to recover his body. Ajax carried him from the field while Odysseus held off the enemy. They brought him back to the ships, and there, surrounded by his myrmidons, the greatest warrior who ever lived breathed his last. Thetis emerged from the sea one final time. She gathered her sisters, the Nereids, and they sang the lament that echoed across the water. The Greeks wept for 17 days. On the 18th, they burned the body of Achilles. His ashes were placed in a golden urn and mingled with those of Patroclus, as both had wished. A great mound was raised on the shore, visible to every ship that would ever sail those waters. The war continued without him. Troy fell, not through force of arms, but through the cunning of Odysseus and his wooden stratagem. But that is another story. The story of Achilles ends here, in fire and ash, in the mingled remains of two who had loved each other beyond all others. The Greeks understood something that later ages would forget. Every hero carries the seeds of his own destruction. Every glory is borrowed from the grave. Achilles knew this. His mother told him. The fates had woven it into the fabric of existence before he drew his first breath. And still he chose. Not because he was foolish, but because he understood that a life without meaning is no life at all. To live long and be forgotten, or to burn bright and be eternal, this was never a choice, it was a revelation. And Achilles embraced it the way fire embraces the wood that feeds it, completely, without regret. Until the very end. If this story moved you, write in the comments, I chose glory.